Hello, welcome back to my channel and even more one-pot dinners. I will leave the recipes or links to videos of the recipes in the description box, as well as the links to the other one-pot dinner videos that I've done. All of these recipes that I've tried are tasty and flavorful and fast becoming family favorites. Sometimes I cheat a little and add a vegetable or a salad, but most of these have such minimal cleanup. This time I'm showing a one-pot chicken pot pie, skillet beef stroganoff, skillet ham and pineapple pizza casserole, shepherd's pie in the Dutch oven using ground beef, and skillet taco casserole. First off is one pot chicken pot pie. I start by cutting a potato into small dices and then putting that into a container with water covering the potato so that it doesn't oxidize. If you're using it right away, you wouldn't have to cover the potato with water, but I was prepping my vegetables ahead of time. I didn't have a regular carrot, so I cut about 6 or 7 baby carrots into a dice. If you're just using a regular carrot, probably just 1 or 2, depending on what your family likes. And then I cut 2 ribs of celery into a fine dice, and then also cut a half of an onion into a fine dice. To make this even easier, you could use half of a bag of frozen mixed vegetables or a can of drained mixed vegetables. I'm also going to need a half of a stick of butter, so I am just unwrapping that and getting that ready for when I start assembling the dish. 1 to 2 pounds of raw boneless chicken cut into cubes or chunks. 1 chicken breast usually equals 1 pound of chicken, and I have 1 that I'm cutting into chunks. I could have possibly used 2 with this, but I only had 1, so that's what I'm working with. And I think the ratio of meat to biscuit to gravy was just fine on this. Remember to sanitize your counters and cutting boards after you have raw chicken on them. I added a tablespoon or 2 of olive oil to the Dutch oven and added a half of the diced onion, adding the chicken in and then seasoning it with salt and pepper. If you wanted to just add the chicken in first by itself and get that cooked and then pull that out of the pot, and then add the onions when you add the rest of the vegetables, you could do that. I'm using fresh vegetables in this dish, but you most certainly could use a can of mixed vegetables that has been drained, or a half a bag of frozen mixed vegetables. And I had some leftover corn in the refrigerator. I don't know why I didn't put that in with it. That would have been good. But a few of my family members do not like peas, so I never work with mixed vegetables because they have peas in them. So I leave the peas out. So if you and your family like peas, be sure to add some peas to this chicken pot pie. I am pulling the chicken and the onions out of the pot just onto a plate because I don't want them to get too overdone. And I am adding a little bit more olive oil and the rest of the vegetables in here, the potatoes, the carrots, and the celery. And since they're raw, they're going to need a few minutes to cook until they're soft. Seasoning this with some pepper and salt, and then I added a couple of sprinkles of thyme leaves on the vegetables. You could leave that out, or you could put some sage, either if you have the whole herb, the sage leaves, you could dice or chiffonade those and put those in, or just some rubbed sage, ground sage would be good in this, or even some poultry seasoning would be good. So whatever your preference for seasonings, you can add that now. When my vegetables were cooked, I added a 1/4 cup of butter, and then I actually went back and put a little bit more in there. So anywhere from a 1/4 cup to a 1/3 cup of butter. We're making a white sauce or bechamel or a cream gravy to be the sauce of our chicken pot pie. If you look at recipes for white sauce, I think most of them will have the same ratio of butter to flour. So if you put a tablespoon of butter, then you put a tablespoon of flour. I added about 3 tablespoons of flour to this, and then went back and added a little bit more just to make more of a paste. It was a little too loose, so I added a little more flour to that. And then I'm just stirring it and letting it sit on the heat for about a minute or two, but stir it so that it won't burn. And I just Googled how many tablespoons of flour are there in a 1/3 of a cup of flour, and the answer was roughly 5 tablespoons. And so we probably were pretty close to that in all of my guesstimation. You need to stir this really well so that you don't get lumps. And I added about 1 3/4 of a cup of water. But you would do chicken broth. And I'm adding 1/2 cup of milk. I had cream. I don't know why I didn't add heavy cream to this, but you could add cream if you wanted it to be a richer sauce. And since I didn't use chicken broth, I am adding a better than bouillon soup base to this. I probably could have added a little bit more, but I was at the end of the jar. And so I had about a teaspoon of that, and then I put a little bit of water to kind of rinse the jar out and get everything out of that. I don't like the better than bouillon. I don't like it as strong as it recommends on the package. So anywhere from a teaspoon or 2 of this will give you good chicken flavor. And so our chicken cream sauce is done, and I am going to add the chicken and onions back into the pot here. and stir that around really well. You can top this chicken pot pie either with a pie crust pastry, or I am using biscuits to top it. And make your life easier and just buy a can of the Pillsbury biscuits to put on top. I had this biscuit mix that I had made and had in the refrigerator that I wanted to use up. And so I think it would be comparable to a Bisquick brand or any kind of biscuit mix that you would buy at the grocery store. So I'm adding 2 cups of that to a bowl, and I don't put a whole cup of milk in, I over poured it. So I'm putting 2/3 of a cup of milk and mixing that up. I think I may have had to put a little bit more milk in there, and I eventually just go in with my hands to combine it and then shape the biscuits just with my hands. I didn't show that, but it's pretty easy. And then I just added the biscuits on top. One of the biscuits turned out way smaller than the others, but I just went ahead and put it on there. There were 6 biscuits total, but this biscuit mix really spreads out, and so it actually turned out more like a cobbler. But either way, it got eaten, so it was delicious. After you place the biscuits on top of the chicken pot pie, you're going to put that into the oven at 425 degrees, and I ended up letting it bake for 20 minutes. And so here we are plating it up, ready to eat. And I didn't show anything next to it on this picture, but a nice flaky, fluffy biscuit and rich, creamy chicken and vegetables and cream sauce. Made for a great Sunday afternoon dinner. Next is Skillet beef stroganoff. And this one really surprised me. One family member kept on going back for more and more and more, and it wasn't who I would have guessed would be doing it. So this was a winner also. I had some sirloin steaks that I had bought on sale a couple of weeks ago when they went on sale, and I sliced them very thinly and then put them in a freezer bag in the freezer. And so these had defrosted and they were room temperature, and I put a little bit of oil in the skillet, and I only put half of the meat in the skillet that I had. I do it into batches so that it doesn't overcrowd the pan. I put salt and pepper and garlic powder on this to season them. And here I am doing the second batch and putting a half of an onion, a chopped onion, in with that to cook. I like to just quick fry beef, especially when it's cut thin like this, so that it doesn't overcook and get tough. And you'll see that I'm pulling it out of the skillet until I can get the rest of the components cooked, and then I will put this back in at the end. If I had been working with raw sliced mushrooms, I would have put them into the fry pan now and cooked them with the steak and the onions. Or after I'd pulled the steak out, just cooked the mushrooms by themselves. But I had bought the mushrooms a couple of weeks ago and sauteed them in a little bit of oil and seasoned them with salt and pepper and maybe garlic and put them in the freezer because I knew that they would spoil before I got to using them. And they work out just fine doing that. I ended up washing the skillet after I cooked the beef in it because a lot of stuff had stuck onto it and I wasn't sure if it had a burned flavor to it or not. I had added the water to it and it just looked so dark that I went ahead and threw it down the drain and washed the pan and then started fresh with fresh water. If your pan doesn't stick like mine does, then that won't be an issue for you. So I added 2 cups of water and a teaspoon of beef broth base, and then 2.5 cups of bow tie pasta to the pan. And I'm just stirring that around, make sure that it's all covered with water. And I'll let that simmer until the pasta is done. Adding in more water if I feel that it needs it. I also added a couple of shakes of Worcestershire sauce to the beef broth when I was making the beef broth. So here I'm adding those frozen mushrooms to the pot to continue thawing. You can also use a can of mushrooms if you want. And then adding in the cooked steak to the pot. I'm adding about 1/2 cup of sour cream. You can add more if you'd like. Check and adjust the seasonings if you need to add more salt and pepper or garlic at this time. If you wanted to add more beef broth and then thicken it with a cornstarch slurry, you could do that, but we liked it the way it was. I made a quick salad from a salad kit, and then I added some peas to the plate. My family doesn't like peas, but I do, and my son-in-law does. And served up the stroganoff, and this was a really, really good meal. The beef was tender, and we all really enjoyed it very much. Next up is skillet ham and pineapple pizza casserole, reminiscent of a Canadian bacon and pineapple pizza. So I think if you like that you'll like this. First off, I'm adding 2.25 cups of water to a skillet and putting a teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon and a half of beef soup base in that, or you can just use 2.25 cups of beef broth, or even chicken broth if you prefer. Next, I'm adding a 14-ounce jar of pizza sauce and stirring that. I'm also opening and then draining the juice off of a can of pineapple chunks. I'm adding 2 cups of pipette pasta to the sauce, and I did go back and put about another 1/4 to 1/2 cup of pasta in as it was cooking because I didn't feel like it was enough, but it probably would have been just fine. You can also use macaroni, elbow macaroni in this if you'd prefer, or bow tie pasta, or penne, whatever you have and whatever you like. I had this on a medium-low heat so that it would boil gently and not burn, and it took about 10 minutes, maybe a little less, to cook for the pasta to become tender. And then I had a package of ham cubes that were already chopped up, and I added those. And then I added some, not the whole can, but part of a can of the pineapple chunks. I just used a part of the package of ham cubes as well. I topped it with shredded mozzarella cheese and then covered it for a few minutes so that the cheese would melt. This would serve about 4 people, maybe 5 if you had other side dishes and they weren't heavy eaters. It kind of reminded me of a canned SpaghettiOs or a canned pasta dish. It was very mild, but the pasta was not mushy or really soft. We liked it, and I think that it would be a crowd pleaser for children, especially. After the cheese melts, I'm just plating it up, and we had some raw vegetables, some carrots and cucumbers and snap peas and tomatoes, and so I just added that to the plate. So it would be a very easy and quick weeknight dinner. I think I spent maybe 10 to 20 minutes on this, so it pulled together very quickly. There's no chopping or dicing. If you wanted to add an onion to it, you could, but I didn't. If you wanted to make it spicier, just add some garlic powder and Italian seasoning or some red pepper flakes to it. Next is one-pot shepherd's pie. I'm using ground beef with this, and I guess technically you're not supposed to call it shepherd's pie unless you're using lamb, ground lamb, but I've always called it that, so I am a creature of habit and can't stop now. I started with about 1.5 pounds of ground beef in my Dutch oven. You can use as little or as much meat as you'd like. That's the beauty of this. And I'm just going to cook that until it's brown. In goes 1/2 of a diced onion. The ground beef was still a little frozen in the middle, and so it took a little bit longer than it normally would have to cook. But we got the job done. I'm going to show you the rest of the ingredients. Here I have 2 packets of brown gravy mix. You could use canned gravy if you wanted, or make your own. I have a can of cut green beans that I'm opening. I have another can on hand if I want more green beans in it. And I have 2 packages of the regular instant mashed potatoes. If you have the boxed kind, that's fine. If you have leftover mashed potatoes from a roast dinner, you can use those. It all works. So I am just mopping up the grease that was rendered off of this ground beef, just with a paper towel, using my tongs to do that, and that works out just fine. Once I've mopped up the grease in the Dutch oven, Then I go ahead and open those 2 packets of brown gravy and pour them over the top of the ground beef. The package says to use 2 cups of water, and so I'm putting that in now and then stirring it and waiting for it to come to a boil to thicken. And I didn't realize until after we were done eating and everything was put away in the refrigerator that I did not season the ground beef. Normally, I would put salt and pepper on this and a little bit of garlic powder, but I didn't do that this time. And I think because of the saltiness of the gravy mix, I didn't even realize that I hadn't seasoned the meat. So I think you'll be just fine if you don't put a lot of salt and pepper on it. You'll taste it and adjust the seasonings to your liking. I heated up 4 cups of water in my microwave for 5 minutes. It says boiling water, but the water was on for 5 minutes, and then I mixed the 2 packets into the water until I got some stiff mashed potatoes. Now the gravy has thickened, and I add in the can of green beans and decide that just 1 can is enough for us tonight. Stir that together well and then add the mashed potatoes on top of the meat and green bean mixture. Okay, so coming up is when my tripod fell over and my camera phone fell into the pot and got gravy on it. But I wiped it off and it was good to go to film the mashed potatoes. This is a big Dutch oven for this amount of food. If you have a shallow Dutch oven, that's great. If you have a cast iron skillet that you can put it in, that's great also. I put a few dollops of butter on the mashed potatoes and then topped it with a couple of handfuls of grated Colby Jack cheese. And then into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think this baked for 30 minutes. Here I am checking it, and I decided to put it back in, and this is it after the full 30 minutes. It looks like a donut. I didn't feel like making a salad or a side vegetable, so this truly was a 1-pot dinner on this night. And it was delicious. We both loved it. Full of flavor, even though I did forget to put the salt and pepper and garlic powder in it. It was fantastic. And this quantity of ingredients will serve about 6 to 8 people. For the last recipe, we have skillet taco casserole. I had browned up 1.5 pounds of ground beef and some onions as I was making meatballs earlier in the morning on this day, and had cooled the meat mixture and put it in the refrigerator for the evening meal. So I'm just adding that back to the skillet. I also have for other ingredients grated cheddar cheese, elbow macaroni, some tomato paste, some Rotel tomatoes, beef base, soup base, or you can use beef broth and water, and taco seasoning. I've added a can of Rotel tomatoes, which also have chilies in them, to the pan with my ground beef and onions, and 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 2 cups of water, and some beef soup base seasoning. I'm adding some taco seasoning. It was homemade, but you can use a package of store-bought taco seasoning mix. And I'm also adding 2 cups of elbow macaroni and stirring this really well. I started out with just 2 cups of water to this mixture, but I kept on adding water. I'm sure that I used close to 3 cups of water in this instead of 2. So you may want to start out adding 2.5 cups of water, and then as the mixture cooks and gets a little dry, keep on adding water to it until you get the desired consistency that you want. The tomato paste also makes it a little thicker, and so if you don't have tomato paste and you're using tomato sauce, you wouldn't need to put as much water in it. I used a taco seasoning that I had made, and so I will leave the recipe or the link to the video for that in the description box if you want to make your own. It's pretty easy. And you probably have all of the spices in your spice cabinet. This simmered for about 20 minutes until the noodles were tender. I added some shredded cheddar cheese to the top of this when the noodles were done and covered it, and I left it on low for a couple of minutes and then turned the heat off. And so I left that for about 5 minutes for the cheese to melt. I chose to put the cheese on top and melt it, but if you wanted to go a different route, you could put shredded lettuce, diced tomatoes, some diced purple onion or red onion, and sour cream and shredded cheese on top of that, and make it like it's a regular taco. And that may sound better to you to serve it that way. I think either way it would be delicious. We don't like our food too hot and spicy, so I just served hot sauce on the side with this. But I felt like with using the Rotel tomatoes that was enough spice for me. And here I am plating it up. I had some corn that I served with it. So here it is, finished and ready to serve. And I estimate that this recipe will serve approximately 4 to 6 people, depending on how hungry they are and what kinds of side dishes or how many side dishes you have to go with it. Here on this night, I am just serving it with corn. Mexican corn or corn relish could be fantastic with this. And also, if you wanted to, you could crush up some Fritos or some corn tortilla chips and put on top of this, or serve whole chips on the side. So here you have 5 easy and tasty one-pot dinner ideas. Perfect for weeknight or weekend dinners. I'll leave the recipes or links to the videos of the recipes in the description box. Please consider subscribing to my channel and press the like button if you liked this video. and comment if you have a comment. And again, thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.